Hey guys, it's Caitlin. Welcome back to my channel. Since it's September 1st, I decided it was probably time for me to go ahead and film my August wrap up and edit it and post it, so we'll see how that goes. I might also include a little bit of my September TBR at the end of this video. So this month I read 9 books, which is a lot for me. I was on vacation for the first week of August, so that definitely contributed. And also, I've been having a public transit issue. The metro that I normally take to work has been out for about 6 weeks now. It's finally getting back up next week. I'm very excited. But in the meantime, I have been taking the bus instead, and that takes considerably longer than my commute on the train, so I have been definitely having some extra reading time this month. The first book that I finished this month was Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I finished it on the car ride up to Rhode Island at the beginning of the month. I had started it, I think, at the end of July. That book was a haul. I don't read a lot of literary fiction, which this falls into the category of, but I was kind of interested because the main character is intersex, and I've been looking at sort of diversifying the books that I read, so I decided to give it a go. Honestly, not very happy about that decision. There was a lot of gratuitous incest in this book, and violence, and sexual violence, and despite what Game of Thrones would have you believe, the combination of these three things does not really make up for good storytelling. I wasn't a fan. Also, if you go online and look up reviews for some of Jeffrey Eugenides' other works, including The Virgin Suicides, there's a lot of reviews on there who are like, oh, Jeffrey Eugenides is great at writing these books about why you should not objectify women. But I think it's kind of a very thin line, like when people are saying discriminatory stuff and they're like, oh, it's just satire, and you're like, do you even know what satire is? That's kind of what these books are doing. I think they're supposed to satirize the objectification of women, but literally in Middlesex, the character has a long-running crush on a girl who he calls the object for the entirety of the book. And that's, at one point he's like, oh, I'm calling her this to protect her identity. You give literally everyone else's names in the book, including your own. You think people couldn't figure that out? You couldn't give her a fake name? You're gonna call her the object the entire time of the book? Oh my god, I hated it. I'm sorry. So yes, Middlesex. Obviously, I can't comment on the quality of the intersex representation, but the story in general, definitely not for me. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. The second book that I finished was Ask the Passengers by A.S. King. It is a contemporary romance featuring a lesbian main character. The book is set in a rural town in the Midwest where a lot of the people are homophobic. Astrid, the main character, has a lot of problems with her dad, who is sort of a pothead. He's become recently a little less involved in her life than he had been in the past, and her mother, who is very pushy and has this idea of what a perfect life should be. Astrid also has a girlfriend, Dee, who is out. She attends another school, and Dee is putting a lot of pressure on Astrid to be out. Astrid's main comfort when she is feeling down is to sit outside and watch the airplanes fly over, and she does this thing where she sort of sends the love up to the passengers. A.S. King has this sort of weird narrative thing where at the beginning of a lot of her chapters, maybe all of her chapters, I don't really remember, she gives the perspective of the passengers up in this plane where they suddenly feel like they have received a gift of love, and I think that came off as a little cheesy. That was something that sort of didn't add to the narrative for me, but overall I really did like this book. I did feel that it was cute. Astrid, her best friends are also another lesbian and a gay man, and she struggles kind of coming out to them as well, but there is a lot of solidarity in there, so I did like that aspect of the book as well. Overall, I did give this book a 4-star out of 5. The third book that I finished this month was The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. This book was a magical realism book set, I believe, in the 50s. It's about this girl who has spontaneously been born with wings. The weird thing about reading this book this month is that the narrative structure actually resembled the narrative structure in Middlesex, which was kind of crazy because they're such different books. But this book, like Middlesex, also looks at the main character, Ava, her family history and how it came to be that she was born and how that sort of played into her life. Unlike Middlesex, I actually really liked this book. I felt like it was written really well. It was definitely a little weird. You kind of have to put aside any expectation that the weirdness and fantastical elements will be explained in a satisfactory manner. I feel like that's the case with a lot of magical realism, but I still liked it anyway. It was a good read. The climax at the end, I could sort of see it coming, but in such a way that I was literally nauseous for probably the last third of the book, because I knew that this terrible thing was going to happen and it wasn't happening yet, and none of the characters knew it was, and it was just very stressful. And I think that feeling, being able to invoke that feeling so well, is a sign of really good writing, really good pacing, and really good plot. So I was very excited for this book. This book was a 5-star out of 5-star for me. The fourth book that I finished this month was Unequal Affections by Laura Ormiston. This book is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. I've mentioned I'm quite fond of these, and this is not the only one that I read this month. I did really enjoy this. I think this book was originally actually posted online as fan fiction, and she went ahead and self-published, which you go, Laura Ormiston, that you are living the life. I love it. And this book was great. The premise was that what if Elizabeth had accepted Darcy's original marriage proposal, sort of put aside her pride, put aside the things that he had said about her family, put aside the things that he had done to George Wickham and her sister, and married for the good of the family. Over the course of this book, you see Elizabeth slowly falling in love with Darcy. One of the things I really liked about this book is that it didn't give a total pass for Darcy's sort of poor behavior in the original Pride and Prejudice. It actually had Elizabeth kind of calling him out for being a snob and a bit rude to her family and friends. It was a bit of a struggle throughout the book, but him eventually realizing that, hey, she's kind of right, I'm kind of being a dick, and adjusting his behavior as much as he can. And, you know, I really like to see some growth in my Pride and Prejudice characters. Darcy is a dreamboat, don't get me wrong, but it's nice to not have all of his worst qualities brushed off as, no, he's just so awkward, it's so cute. And to have some actual, like, self-reflection and character growth and mutual respect in a relationship going on. I really liked this book. I would strongly recommend it to anyone who is a Pride and Prejudice fan. At the time I finished this book, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I think I would probably up that to like 4.5. I really liked this book. The 5th book that I finished this month was Uprooted by Naomi Novik. Another book that I really loved. It is a retelling of some Eastern European folklore. It is about a village that is ruled by this wizard, and every 10 years he takes a village girl up to sort of make his meals and keep him company and that sort of thing, and he ends up taking up this village girl who has magic of her own. And that's a good thing, because there is, on the edge of this village, on the edge of this whole territory really, an evil forest that has been slowly sort of taking over the area, and it is getting a lot stronger and bad stuff goes down. It was, I don't know what I can say, it was a great book. All the descriptions of the forest I felt like were really unique and really creepy. I would love to see a horror movie adaptation of this. Honestly, I feel like it would translate really well the whole thing with the forest was terrifying throughout the whole book. It was a really original take on a villain / antagonist. I am definitely going to be checking out some of Naomi Novik's other books. This book for me was 5 out of 5 stars. The 6th book that I read this month was Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Abertali. This book is a sequel to Love, Simon, which did have a movie adaptation made of it earlier this year. I really loved the movie adaptation and then actually read the book for the first time after I watched the movie. Really loved the original book. That was a 5-star book for me. And I really loved this book as well. I'm not actually going to talk about it a lot right now because I am expecting to talk about it in a video that I will be posting in September. But the book does feature one of Simon's best friends, Leah, who is a bisexual, but she has not told anyone in her life about it. Leah can be a bit rude, she's a bit blunt, and she's a really refreshing main character. I felt like I loved the story. I loved the love story. This book was a 5 out of 5 star for me. The 7th book that I finished this month was Queens of Geek by Jen Wild. This had a cute premise. It had a diverse cast. It was about 3 best friends who were traveling to go to a convention where they found love. Normally, I'm really into books with geeky / fanish characters, but unfortunately this book just really didn't do it for me. My main problem was the plot and the pacing. The plot itself was a little bit simplistic, although I do think that could have been fixed with some better pacing. Really, the issue was that the problems that these characters were having were being solved within a couple of pages of the problem being introduced. There was not really a lot of time to build tension or stress of any kind, and it was just not a very exciting read for me. This would probably be great for someone who is going into it sort of looking for a really chill romance with a diverse cast with some queer ladies. If you're really just looking for fluff over strong literary content, you'd probably really like this book. I probably would have liked this book a little bit more if I had realized that that's what this was going in. I was really only able to give this like a 2-star. The 8th book that I finished this month is The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet. This is, as you might guess from the title, another Pride and Prejudice adaptation, and for those of you who have seen it, it is based on the web series The Lizzie Bennet Diaries. It does give a little more information than the web series does about what's going on. There's definitely more details included about conversations that happened off camera. I really loved the web series, so I did like the book. I do feel like the first half of it was a little slow for me because there wasn't a ton happening on page that hadn't been discussed or shown in the web series, but I do feel like the second half of it definitely provided a lot more detail than the videos did. There are some things in the web series that were just written off. They didn't make a lot of sense if you thought about it, but they were sort of written off in that sort of rom-com world logic sort of way, and this book tries to make a little bit more sense of them, which I felt like it was moderately successful at doing. So I did appreciate parts of this book. I would recommend it if you are a big fan of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries like I am. This book was a 3.5 out of 5 star for me. The 9th book that I read this month was Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. This is a pretty well-known book / movie, and I have actually never seen or read either of them. So I thought it was probably time, if you are Googling good Pride and Prejudice adaptations, this book comes up. However, I don't feel like the story mirrored Pride and Prejudice really well enough to be called a Pride and Prejudice adaptation. I think Bridget Jones had really no qualities that she shared with Elizabeth Bennet whatsoever. This book may just be a victim of not aging well. It was originally published in 1998, I believe, but oh my god, Bridget obsesses over her weight for the entire book, and she's like bouncing back between like 120 and 130 pounds. So that's a little ridiculous. It's never something that's really addressed in the book. Like at one point, she's been trying to get down to like 119 for her entire life, and at one point she actually manages it, and all of her friends are like, Bridget, we really feel like you looked better before, which I won't get into that particular brand of misogyny, but that was kind of an opportunity for the author to like have the main character at least be like, hey, I should maybe stop focusing so much on my weight because it's not what defines me as a person. And everything I thought I knew about what women should weigh was a huge lie. And she doesn't. She just keeps obsessing over her weight. Literally at the beginning of every entry in her diary, she puts what she weighs and how many calories she's eaten that day. Definitely would not suggest reading this if you have like a history of disordered eating. Really wouldn't suggest anyone reading this. It was, yeah, just... This was a 2-star book for me and a 1-star adaptation because really this was nothing like Pride and Prejudice. The 10th and final book that I read this month is Pantomime by Laura Lamb. This is the second book that I read this month featuring an intersex main character. This person is also heavily coded as non-binary. It's shown that they don't fully consider themselves to be either a man or a woman. The issue of pronouns isn't really addressed in this book. And the main character, Micah, was raised as a girl and then runs away when they find out that their parents want them to have a surgery in order to fix their intersex condition. And they disguise themselves as a boy in order to join the circus. I'm using they and them, but some people do use he and him, and I think an argument can be made for that because it does seem throughout the book that they are more comfortable with masculinity than they were with femininity. There are fantasy elements in this book. Intersex people, I guess, aren't thought to exist in this world, which is a little strange to me considering the prevalence of intersex people in our world, but they do have legends about them, and in those legends they have magical powers. Micah has these powers as well, but they're not very well explored in this book. This book actually focuses primarily on Micah being in the circus and falling for this woman there. Micah is a bisexual character, so they don't use that word on the page. They are very clearly described as being attracted to both men and women in this book. Honestly, the pacing for me was a little bit weird just because I knew that there was this fantasy element that was sort of bubbling underneath, and I was really ready for them to get to it, but it looks like that's not going to fully come into play until the second book. The world building was also a little bit off for me. It's set in a different world in what is the equivalent, I think, of about the 1800s in our world, but I don't feel like they did a very good job of it. The dynamics of like the population and the economy and issues with like poverty play a big role in the world building and the plot, but they're not handled very well. I almost feel like Laura Lamb would have done a better job if she had just stuck this story in an alternate versions of our 1800s, sort of like how you see in a lot of steampunk books or urban fantasy novels where, you know, everything's happening in New York City, but it's not the New York City that we know. I feel like that path might have been a lot more effective for Laura Lamb just because, like I said, the world building is a little bit off, a little bit confusing. A lot of the stuff doesn't really make logical sense. With the pacing and the world building, this book probably would have been a 3 or 3.5 for me. However, the last like 80 pages or so did get a lot more exciting and a lot more action-packed, and now I'm super stoked to read the next book, so I'll go ahead and give it a 4 out of 5 star. So that's it for books that I have read this month. I have a feeling that this video is probably going to be pretty long, so I'm not going to spend too much time on my September TBR, but I did want to show a couple of books that I am currently working on or am expecting to read in the next month. The first book on my September TBR is Otherbound by Corinne Duvis. I just started this book last night, and I'm already really excited about it. It is a fantasy book following 2 protagonists. One is in our regular everyday world, and the other is in a world that I believe is called Dune's World, and it's a typical fantasy world, nothing to do with ours. However, when Nolan, the guy who lives in the everyday world, every time he blinks or closes his eyes for any reason, he is transported into Amara, the protagonist of the Dune's World timeline. He is transported into her mind. This is obviously pretty disruptive for him and is really affecting his life. Amara has magical healing powers, and she is trying to protect a princess who has been overthrown and is on the run. This is another book with a really diverse cast. And so far, I really like the way it's told, I really like the world building, and I'm really excited to keep reading it. I'm about 70 pages in, so we'll see how it goes. I also started in August the Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet. This is a sequel to the Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet, and this takes place after the events that happen in the web series and in the book, and it shows Lydia sort of trying to get her life back on track. I am about maybe a quarter of the way through this book, and it's stressing me out a lot just because I'm someone who is a little obsessed with planning and timelines, and Lydia is very much not, and it is a big part of the conflict in the book, and honestly just reading about people missing deadlines and things like that makes me really stressed. So I'm not enjoying it very much so far. We'll see. Hopefully I'll be able to get into it a little bit more as the story goes on. The third book I am planning on reading in September is I Hate Everyone But You by Gabby Dunn and Allison Raskin. I don't really know a lot about this story other than it is about two friends who go to separate colleges, and they're dealing with that, the distance and what it means for their friendship, and kind of feelings of being alone. And I am expecting that I'm going to really love this because I love friendship and books, and I am also living far away from my best friends, and it's really rough. We'll see how it goes. Alright, that's it for my August wrap-up. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what you've thought in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Bye! Sorry, this cover has got like a clear library plastic thing over it. It's making it very reflective. Sorry. God, this is killing me.